don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea. We've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. We've elected an African-American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country, but no one currently alive was responsible for that.
When I first moved to Savannah, I took a neighborhood walking tour. We went through the West Savannah neighborhood and we came across this historical marker, and it said the largest slave auction in Georgia history. Turns out it's actually the largest documented slave auction in American history. And I sat there basically dumbfounded, wondering why, as a born Georgian, I'd never heard of this.
There are certain monumental events in the history of the South. The Weeping Time sale was the largest sale at one time of human beings in the history of slavery in the United States. And so, of course, if you're studying history and you're taking a course in Southern history, and that's an aside, because you got two kinds of Southern history. The Southern history that still fights the Civil War, and then you've got the more objective Southern history that tries to talk about what the real facts are, and they're not trying to romanticize slavery, nor the cause of the Civil War.
The captivity of human beings in the city of Savannah was an essential part, and it was part of the fabric of the society, part of the foundation of the society. So using Savannah as a microcosm of this entire nation. We have one person, he will share in the 1800s, he will say that Savannah and Charleston will direct the business. He said that Philadelphia and Washington will legislate the business. Then he will go on and say that New York will finance it, and New England will build the ships. He showed that every part of the Eastern Seaboard was complicit in this right here. But he's showing that this entire nation is benefiting from the sale of human beings.
The Butler estates, which originally began with Major Pierce Butler, particularly the estates off the coast of Georgia, so around St. Simon's Island, Little St. Simon's Island, were really generational properties.
These weren't people who were bought and sold. There was a lot of, say, like urban slavery, where people were sold and bought 5, 6, 7 times in their lifetime. None of these folks had been ever sold before.
People who were enslaved there, most of them lived there their entire lives from birth to death.
So it was even more extraordinary that this was happening on such a large scale with a population of people who were enslaved, who had never known anything but the place they had lived and worked, been enslaved. Pierce Mies Butler was the owner of these enslaved people that he had inherited these slaves from his great-grandfather, Major Pierce Butler. So Major Pierce Butler was considered one of the founding fathers of the country. He was a South Carolina senator and was one of the signatories of the Constitution. And he was also the author of Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution. And it says, "No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. If a slave escapes and tries to go to a different state, if it's a non-slave state, they are obligated to return that person to its, quote, rightful owner. And again, they didn't say slave in the Constitution, but the intent was clear because Major Butler was, at the time of the writing of the Constitution, the largest, if not the largest, one of the largest slaveholders in America.
I was aware of that sale, and when I became mayor, I had opportunities to advance certain things that as a citizen I could lift up and raise up and advocate for, but being mayor, I had the opportunity to do something about it. And in the city council chambers, there were these 2 life-size portraits of Confederate soldiers right in front of the dais where the city council sits in their rebel uniforms, which means that they committed treason against the United States. And we're going to make them heroes? We devised a plan to get those portraits removed and sent to a museum where they rightfully belong. And as a result of that, I got lambasted in the Southern press about it, that I was dishonoring their heritage. As a result of my doing that, the question was raised, should the city council apologize for slavery? I said, the majority of this city council is African American. We're not going to apologize for slavery. Well, what about the weeping times? There's no public acknowledgement of the weeping times and what that meant. And that is how we got the marker over on Augusta Avenue, which was the first decent recognition of what is called the weeping times.
Pierce Butler and his brother John inherited these 2 estates. One was on St. Simon's Island, which is just off the coast of Georgia. That was a cotton plantation. And the other was Butler Island Plantation, which is nearby in South Georgia, and that was a rice plantation. The 2 estates had around 900 or so enslaved people. The ownership was basically split between Pierce Butler and his brother John. The Butlers were one of the richest families in the entire nation.
Much of the information about the Butler plantations comes from Fanny Kimball's journals.
She was from a very well-known family in London, a very famous actor family from the theater. Her father was a famous theater person. She was on tour with her father at the time that Pierce Butler saw her in this performance.
Frances Kimball Butler married Pierce Butler, and she claims throughout her life that she did not know Pierce Butler owned slaves before their marriage.
The interesting thing is Fanny Kimball was an abolitionist, and she ended up wanting to be brought down to the plantations to actually see this slavery, which she had only heard and read about.
And you know, I don't think that people who did not live in the South, particularly people who didn't even live in this country, I doubt that they did know the brutality of the day-to-day system. Slaveholders, Southern slaveholders, did romanticize their treatment of the people they enslaved. Specifically, they talked a lot about treating people like family, providing for their needs, bringing them to Christianity in ways that evoke this paternalistic vision of caretaking. I don't know if that's what Fanny Kimball expected when she got there, but it's certainly not what she saw. What she saw was extremely high infant mortality rates. She saw large numbers of children being cared for by children. She saw women being raped and exploited by other enslaved people, by overseers, and by slave owners. And she wrote about all those things. And we have her journals.
She ended up publishing what was called the Journal of a Residence on a Georgia Plantation, which still to this day is considered one of the most detailed eyewitness accounts of slavery.
There was a very, very successful businessman, very influential, very connected businessman by the name of Gazaway Lamar, who lived in Savannah with his family. And in 1838, he took his family on a vacation up north on one of his boats, the SS Pulaski. During the voyage up there, it exploded at sea off the coast of North Carolina. Gazaway lost his wife, 3 daughters, 2 sons, and a niece. Only Gazaway, his 26-year-old sister, and his 14-year-old son, Charles, survived. Gazaway would recover, he would remarry, and Charles would grow up to become the South's most notorious and infamous slave trader.
Originally, the auction was supposed to take place in downtown Savannah at Joseph Bryant's slave trading pens, but it was determined that there were so many enslaved individuals and also so many speculators that were going to bid on these people that it just wasn't logistically feasible for them to do it downtown. So it was decided that they hold this auction at the Ten Brock racetrack, which is about 2.5 miles outside of downtown Savannah. So slavery itself was still legal and auctions were happening, but the slave trade, the importation of individuals from Africa, was criminalized. The interesting thing is, right around this time, Charles Lamar, who was the owner of Ten Brock Racetrack, he had come up with this scheme of importing Africans from Africa against the law by outfitting this yacht, which was called the Wanderer.
Charlie was a terrible businessman. You have to understand, by the time Charlie got involved in the Wanderer, he was broke, even though his father handed him the Savannah business empire on a silver spoon. He owned that track, but so many of his properties he mortgaged to raise money for his illegal slaving schemes. The Wanderer was owned by a New Yorker originally. There were squadrons, basically mostly British ships and a few American ships, patrolling the coast of Africa looking for slavers. Somebody in the partnership got the idea, well, why not send a yacht, a pleasure craft over there under the guise of a round-the-world adventure trip and hunting trip and fool the squadrons. And that's what they did. They bought the Wanderer, the syndicate of 8 men. One of the members of the syndicate who became the captain of the Wanderer was a smooth-talking Washington lobbyist, William C. Curry. He was the sole owner, even though behind the scenes there were 7 other partners. Knew the part, spoke the part, and was able to get accepted as a member of the New York Yacht Club.
At the time of this great slave auction, they had caught the people who had been on the ship and had tried to import these enslaved people, and they were in jail at the time.
There's no doubt that Charlie was a supporter of slavery and thought the slave trade should be legalized, there's no doubt. But Charlie got involved in the slave trade when he was broke. And he talked about all these high-minded principles, and he talked about it, but he didn't get involved until he was out of money and he needed to make money quick. And he always said, let me bring a shipment of Africans into America and let me bring it to the courts and let me see if I have the constitutional right to import slaves based on our Constitution as judged in the courts. He always said that, but when he finally got caught and went to court, he did everything he could to evade the legal system. So I don't want to give Charlie the credit that he was a high-minded, principled guy believing in Southern rights. He undoubtedly did, but his main motivation was money.
Charles Lamar is right here. He's from here. His family's involved in it. He's involved in it. He understands the wealth to this nation for him and his family tied to human beings. And he wants to reestablish that, making sure that it is stronger for them to still be able to sell human beings right here in Savannah. Not just in the yards and in the marts, domestically, but showing internationally.
His whole goal was to reopen the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade.
So in the very beginning, after the seizure of the Wanderer and the expose of the crime, he regained his footing and fought back with everything he had. And he did thumb his nose at the government.
He would basically go around town kind of bragging that he had gotten away with this. And at one point,
He paraded one slave boy around Savannah.
there was no doubt as to whether or not Charles Lamar was connected to this. However, the judicial system at the time found that there was that he had no connection. So he basically got off scot-free. You know, we've been told that the Civil War wasn't just about slavery. It was about states' rights, and it was about this or that. It was about states' rights to own slaves. That was what was going on. That was what was happening at the time. Everyone was talking about slavery. The fact that the South wanted the transatlantic slave trade to be reopened.
And Savannah was a place where Africans were bought and sold. It was a part of the culture.
I do think it's important to say that while the South fought the Civil War for slavery, and you can read the Articles of Secession for pretty much every state, you can listen to the Cornerstone speech, or you can read the Cornerstone speech, and you will see that the South fought this war over slavery and the right to have slaves. I think it's important to say that the North did not necessarily fight this war over abolition. The North fought to maintain the cohesion of the Union and the economic benefits of having the agrarian South feeding into the Northern industry. It wasn't really an abolitionist war. Abolition was a wonderful thing that came out of the war.
We do have a historical marker downtown in front of the Green Meldrum House that acknowledges the fact that this was the headquarters of General Sherman.
So Sherman came to Savannah, and at that time he already had a large number of free African Americans who had been formerly enslaved following his army. He needed to find a way to provide for them, and he also needed to figure out what to do with the formerly enslaved African American population of the city of Savannah. And he did something that was pretty revolutionary and wonderful.
Sherman met with 20 blacks to discuss the future of the free people after slavery.
He called a meeting of 20 community leaders to talk to them about what they saw as their people's future.
About how they viewed being free and what they thought they needed to succeed as becoming citizens and self-sufficient individuals in this society.
By and large, what they want is land. They want land and the opportunity for their families to provide for themselves. And out of that meeting, Sherman drafts Special Field Order number 15,
which gave land to freed black people from North Carolina to the John River in Florida, from the coast and all of those sea islands, 30 miles inland, to be settled by blacks and to give them the opportunity to really establish themselves economically and socially as free people.
That land will be turned over to these newly freed people in blocks of 40 acres per family, no more than 800 feet of waterfront for each group, and they will be able to farm that land and support themselves. It later comes to be known as 40 acres and a mule because Sherman does later provide for some of the Army surplus mules to be loaned to people to start to work that land. And so that's where we get that phrase today. It was a great plan. The Freedmen's Bureau is formed 2 months later to administer this whole plan. And unfortunately, not too long after Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, Andrew Johnson overturns Field Order Number 15, and he returns that land to the Confederates who had rebelled against the Union. It's unfortunate. It was a moment that our country had a chance to start people off on the road to equality, and he chose not to do that.
When Sherman sits down with 20 black ministers, and those ministers say, only one of we will crack your teeth for we, which in Gullah means only one will speak for all of us. And they got Reverend Garrison Frazier from First Bryan Baptist Church now to speak on behalf of all those ministers. And so Frazier now, when quizzed by Sherman about what did the war represent, Frazier now understands to convey to Sherman, listen, this war, and I'm paraphrasing, this war is not just about us getting freedom, it's about land.
40 acres and a mule would have changed the United States of America as we know it.
The 40 acres between Charleston, South Carolina and St. Johns River in Florida, 30 miles inland, comes to 400,000 acres of land, which is quite a fresh start for a number of families.
You have to understand that the slaves were experts at agriculture. Even though they didn't have an opportunity to read and write, they were experts in their field. They understood how to cultivate the land. They understood how to make the land work, and it didn't matter exactly what the weather was or where the land was located. They knew how to make it work. So if those slaves had the opportunity to actually own the land that they worked, economically it would have shifted the United States of America as we know it, because now not only do they have the knowledge, but they have the resources and the financial power to grow that knowledge.
So Andrew Johnson overturned Field Order Number 15, returned land to the Confederates. And it's an interesting question, why did he make those choices? I think, first of all, he was not Abraham Lincoln. He had a lot more sympathy for the South than Lincoln ever did. He was not an abolitionist. But I think it's also important to understand the existing power structure and how the North and the South interacted with each other economically and politically, and how the overturning of that political structure in the South and the loss of power by the people who had been in power for generations would have upset what powerful Northern people perceived as their place in the larger system as well. Ultimately, if you were wealthy and white, you were at the top of the power structure and seen as having a rightful God-given place at the top of the power structure. And it was not in their best interest to overturn that vision of hierarchy.
America is one of the richest countries in the world because it was partially built for free. You have to understand, many blacks, especially our ancestors, the Africans, they were never considered United States citizens. So therefore, they never had an opportunity to benefit from the rights and the privileges of citizenship.
There is just a noble history of struggle here to become a part of this place. And when you look at it, the resistance for full integration is still going on. And that's why I rarely use the word integration, because at best we are desegregated. We are now not legally mandated to be a part, but the concept of integration says that you are an integral part of the whole.
So even after the Emancipation Proclamation, even after the passing of the 13th Amendment, they still were not fully considered citizens. Because once you're considered a citizen, you get all of the rights and the privileges of citizenship, i.e. the right to vote, housing, equal treatment, and equal protection under the law. So essentially what happened with the passing of the 13th Amendment in 1865, slavery didn't end, it was reinvented.
And African Americans are really still not fully a part of the whole of the society. We still have pretty much a culture of social and economic segregation.
If you want to talk about the healing of this nation, you got to put it all on the table. You got to put it out there. You got to let everybody see. Everybody got to understand it and then deal with each other honestly and fairly about all this right here. That's when we'll be healed.
So the disparity between blacks and whites is very real. It's very, very, very real. Economically, professionally, communally. You know, for examples, a lot of blacks are trying to simply access the bare minimum, where it seems that their white counterparts are enjoying the benefits of the maximum as it relates to farming, as it relates to education, as it relates to politics. The United States of America had its first black president in the year 2008, and for black people, we felt euphoric. We had an opportunity to understand what it feels like to see one of our own in the White House, and we had an opportunity to feel like our voices would finally be heard and our interests would finally be discussed. Whites have only known whites in the White House. They've only known what it's like to see their own on television, or to hear their own on the radio, or to see their own in print. So for the first time in our history in this country, we had an opportunity to see that. And even in that, we're still experiencing the lash of the inequality that exists.
We must deal with things fairly and then say, you didn't pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. In some cases, it was stolen, it was given, it was awarded, it was appropriated, and you benefited from it.
The marker helped to show how far we have come from the conditions that marker commemorates. From being chattel that could be sold to pay off somebody's debt, the division of families without any concern for their humanity. We've come a long way from that. But when you say, have black people become fully a part of the society in every way, my answer is no. When you look at the poverty rate, and we look at residential segregation, we look at the performance of blacks and whites in the public schools, there's still wide gaps there in income, in health disparities, in every negative indicator that you can use. We're coming up short. I think we have a very long way before African Americans can say they are exercising their full citizenship in terms of measuring that up against what the American dream says should be.
When asked about reparations, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell offered a familiar reply. America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago, since none of us currently alive are responsible. This rebuttal proffers a strange theory of governance, that American accounts are somehow bound by the lifetime of its generations. But well into this century, the United States was still paying out pensions to the heirs of Civil War soldiers. We honor treaties that date back some 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. Many of us would love to be taxed for the things we are solely and individually responsible for. But we are American citizens, and thus bound to a collective enterprise that extends beyond our individual and personal reach.